We can get started. Hello everyone, and hello to those watching this replay. Today, in this webinar, we're going to talk about co-evaluation. We'll see what co-evaluation actually is, what it's used for, and how we can implement it on ChangeB. As a reminder, since the beginning of September, we've been organizing webinars focusing on different use cases. So what we're going to look at today is, first of all, when we talk about co-evaluation, what exactly does it mean? What benefits can we expect, whether for students or teachers? We'll see that there are different formats we can address, and we'll show you some examples of formats that we at least regularly observe and how we can set up this type of activity. So a little checklist, some things to check when setting up this format, and how challenge.me will be useful for making it easier to implement this type of evaluation. And then we'll move on to the platform to see concretely how it works. The idea isn't to cover all the features, but just the basics to launch this type of activity. So maybe just a quick slide about change.me for those who don't know us. We are a solution for assessment and feedback. So we make it possible to set up different formats, different types of educational scenarios. We have very simple activity formats for peer assessment, intra-group evaluation, and oral presentation assessment. We can also do co-evaluation, which is today's topic. We can really set up different types of assessment formats where we actually ask the student to take on the role of evaluator and provide a critical perspective on their peers' work, on each person's involvement, as I mentioned, on oral presentations, and on the feedback they've received. We can really create a wide variety of formats. We are integrated with the main LMS platforms, Moodle, Blackboard, Brightspace, so there's no need to log in. No additional password is required to access it when it's integrated. Everything is done through the LMS, and today we work with business schools, engineering schools, and universities in France, Switzerland, Canada, and Belgium. Now let's get to the heart of the matter. What do we mean when we talk about co-assessment? What does it refer to? So we're going to talk about co-assessment when a student, or in any case, a piece of work or a presentation, whatever it may be, is evaluated by several different types of graders. These could be students, so peer assessment. They could be teachers or external professionals. There can also be self-assessment. So it's really about combining several types of assessment for the same deliverable, the same performance. And the idea is to be able to cross perspectives. So making sure that each profile can bring a specific perspective, academic, practical, or collaborative, for a more complete view of the work. As I mentioned, this works with all types of assessment. It can be for assignments that are submitted, such as CVs, posters, case studies, and so on. It can be for presentations, things that aren't necessarily submitted, not necessarily deliverables, but performances, in-class presentations. We also work with hospitality schools where they evaluate cooking or service performances. There are also teachers in sports practices who can implement this type of activity. So it's not necessarily limited to the evaluation of deliverables. It can really be for any type of format, depending on the project you have. It's really about combining perspectives with the different types of evaluators. So each evaluator brings a complementary perspective. Teachers ensure academic rigor, peers encourage exchange and collective progress, and then external professionals, when we're lucky enough to be able to include them as well. In these formats, they can bring a professional and practical perspective. So in terms of benefits for students, they receive diverse and complementary feedback to enrich their learning. This will help them better understand the expectations of different profiles. And then they will also develop their ability to adapt their communication to different perspectives, since they will have to produce a deliverable or a service that will be evaluated by various types of reviewers. And so they will need to adapt this work so that it best meets the expectations of the different profiles. And then for teachers, it will be a gain in time thanks to an initial analysis carried out by peers or other evaluators. So when we need to assess, we can also look at the initial analysis that was done by those reviewers. So often peer assessment comes first. If there are other reviewers, it can also be interesting to take a look. This will strengthen the validity and reliability of the assessments through the diversity of perspectives. So above all, the diversity of feedback is interesting because it really allows for something personalized in terms of feedback. It's true that giving individual feedback to each student can be long and tedious. Here, it's true that with correlation, we can use it to provide feedback to students by using different reviewer profiles. And as a result, we will turn the variations into rich educational tools thanks to the diversity of feedback. So here, assessment can also become a lever for learning, not necessarily just a tool for control, or at least not only a tool for control, but really allows us to use assessment as a learning tool with the different feedback that will also be exchanged through assessment by these various reviewer profiles. So in terms of format, this is a fairly classic format that we will find. So there will be a submission of work by the students. And so this work will be evaluated by teachers, by students, and by professionals at the same time, or at slightly different times, depending on what you want to set up. But there you have it. This is a format that you typically find when talking about co-evaluation. So here I have 3 types of graders, but very often you also find evaluation by teachers and by students, or simply just those 2 groups. This is a format that is quite common. And it's true that when we're using this format in terms of grading, a question that can come up is whether to take into account the peer evaluation grade. In the final grade, it actually depends on the student's ability to evaluate correctly. There are teachers who will prefer not to use the peer evaluation grade in the final grade. Others will say it will be, for example, 80% from the teacher's grade and then 20% from the student's grades. And then with students who are further along in their studies and have a certain level of maturity, we see teachers who also use the peer evaluation grade as the final grade, since they know that the students they are dealing with are mature enough to be able to evaluate. So it really depends on the student's maturity at that level. In any case, this form of assessment, whether or not it's used for grading, it will be very useful in helping students make progress on the concepts being covered. We're talking about assessment, but there's a big part of feedback involved in assessment. It's true that in our activity formats, we often recommend implementing feedback precisely to support this progression. You can also find this coherence in an iterative format, meaning that students are asked to submit work that will be evaluated by other students, peer assessment. From there, they can look at the results they've received, whether it's grades or feedback. And then we will ask them for a second submission, which will be improved by taking the feedback into account. And this second submission should theoretically be more polished and can be evaluated by the teachers. So in this case, it's true that this format allows teachers to have higher quality work to assess. And it also reassures students through the feedback they receive, making sure they're not off topic, so that also allowing them to discover what others have done, to see where they stand compared to others, and to adapt their own work accordingly, so that the final submission is of higher quality, and at that point will be evaluated by the teachers. Then once again, regarding the grade, it's a good idea to include a small portion of the first evaluation in the final grade. That can work. 10 to 20%, then the final grade is made up of the teacher's assessment. This is a format we've also seen elsewhere, so we've included it in co-evaluation because in the end, it's an assessment done both by the teacher and the student. The student themselves through a self-assessment. So here, in fact, the idea is to ask the student to submit an assignment. If there is an assignment submission, it could also be a performance. The student is asked to self-assess this performance using very specific criteria. And then the teacher is asked to adjust this self-assessment. That is, based on what the teacher has observed, they will be able to adjust the evaluations, either upwards or downwards, on the criteria the student has set for themselves. And this will make it possible to generate a grade that ultimately takes into account both the student's self-assessment and the teacher's adjustment. And it's true that this can also be interesting in terms of saving time, since the teacher ends up with the list of students and the grades they've given themselves. Adjusting each grade up or down. So it's true that this is a format we also regularly use on our side. A quick slide on the criteria to suggest to students when we're talking about co-evaluation. I'm going to use the format where students evaluate each other and the teachers also evaluate. For the students, we won't ask them to give a score. It's true that what we recommend is to use criteria like these with a criterion and different levels with a description for each level to allow the student to have as little, when evaluating, to leave as little room as possible for subjectivity, and so that they don't have to give a score but rather select an option that seems relevant to them in relation to what they have to evaluate. So here I have a criterion on the quality of the argumentation, but we have different criteria on Challenge Me with this same model, which allows students to evaluate in a simpler way without thinking about the grade they will give in the end. Then each level, each option is linked to a number of points. This makes it possible to generate a grade, but for the student, it's true that this is an approach we actually recommend for peer assessment. Then for teachers, we had already tested these formats that were put in place, these types of criteria. There are teachers who appreciate them, but it's true that teachers often, the perception we have and the feedback we've received is that they tend to prefer giving a numerical grade. And so in a co-evaluation format, you can absolutely use these criteria for the students. And for teachers, maybe just give a score or a score associated with criteria. So after that, the format is flexible at this stage. But what you should really keep in mind is that, especially for students, it's important to have well-detailed criteria like these to allow for the most qualitative evaluation possible. In terms of criteria, we recommend 5 to 6 criteria for the students. If you're wondering, that's a number that works quite well. If you include too many, the risk is that they'll go through them rather quickly and won't take the time to evaluate them properly. And if there are too few, the grade won't necessarily be meaningful. So what we recommend is 5 to 6 criteria. The benefit of co-evaluation as well is that it allows you to make progress thanks to the feedback that will be exchanged, whether it's from students, teachers, or external professionals. So what can also be interesting is to train students in giving feedback before moving on to this type of activity. To train students in feedback, it can be done fairly quickly. Just tell them, what we expect from you in terms of feedback is to provide facts, objectives, strengths, areas for improvement, and suggestions for improvement. So here, this is a screenshot of a guide that we offer. Afterwards, you can feel free to use it as inspiration, modify it if needed, but it includes the purpose of feedback, which is to help your peer. And so to avoid getting feedback like good job or could do better, feedback that wouldn't necessarily be useful for the students. So it's about raising their awareness of this concept of feedback. By default, we have guides, as I mentioned, that are included in the activities. So you can absolutely present them a bit beforehand to show them the value of feedback and make sure that the feedback they give is qualitative. So here's a short checklist of things to consider when you want to implement this format. So first of all, the first step is to plan the evaluation periods for each type of reviewer. Define what the reviewer profiles are, whether it's peer evaluation, teacher evaluation, whether I'm also including external coaches or self-evaluation, and then clearly define the period during which each reviewer will be asked to evaluate. Next, it's about defining the criteria that will be used by these different reviewer profiles. Do we keep the same criteria or do we use different criteria for each profile? As I mentioned just before, for students, we will still recommend criteria with predefined options to make evaluation easier. And then for teachers, perhaps more quantitative criteria. Next, explain to the students the purpose of this type of activity. Is it to make progress? Is it to receive feedback? Will the grade count or not? This is more about explaining the value to the students. Train students to give useful and constructive feedback, as we just discussed earlier. Choose the options for displaying results to students. So here, do we decide to show students only the feedback, or do we also show them the grades they've received? So these are choices you can make. On change.me, you'll be able to check the options that interest you. In case of re-evaluation, to ensure seriousness, and then assign a weighting for each type of grader in the final grade. So as I mentioned earlier, depending on the student's maturity in their ability to assess, you can give more or less weight to the grade they gave themselves in the final grade. A quick slide on why to use ChangeMe for this type of evaluation. With ChangeMe, you will have templates, whether they are activity templates or existing criteria to set up this format. This will allow you to easily configure this type of approach. There will be automatic email reminders to prompt graders about the evaluations. If you have several teachers who need to grade, it can notify them automatically. If you have an entire cohort of students as well, with many students evaluating, they will also receive automatic emails. You will have Excel reports that summarize all the evaluations received and the feedback as well, so you can process it in Excel, reuse it, or re-import it into other tools if you need to import it elsewhere. You'll be able to calculate grades directly in the tool, apply weightings by criteria, by grader profile, and so on. We'll see how to do that. And then you have a support team, which I am part of, that is here to assist you. If you have any questions, whether they're technical or about the approach, best practices, etc., you can reach out to us. And we also have an AI assistant, what we call AI agents, which can be activated by Phase to, for example, help students give relevant feedback, assist them in completing their work, or support the teacher in grading. We have a number of agents that can help participants with challenges in completing their assessments or in carrying out their work. We will hold a dedicated webinar on these agents. After that, we have guides and educational resources to make all of this easier. Now I'll move on to challenge.me to show you concretely how it works on the platform. I'll do a short demonstration from a Moodle environment. Another LMS like Moodle, Blackboard, or others will work in the same way. So the idea is that we're going to go to the course where we want to add a Challenge Me activity. Then we'll click on Add an activity or resource, which you'll find right here. And here I'll select Challenge Me from my activity selector. I'll enter peer assessment and click on Save and Display. And then I clicked on Open in a new window. And here I'll land on this interface where I can create a new challenge from scratch without a template. What we call a challenge is a Challenge Me activity. So here I can add the phases I'm interested in one by one, submission phases, evaluation phases by students, by teachers, and so on. I can easily create a challenge starting from 0. And then further down, I have templates available. So here I can easily select a template, submission and evaluation of work. So in this case, there would be a submission phase, an evaluation phase, and a results phase. You can also do group member evaluation. So here there's an evaluation phase for group members and a results phase. Well, that's not today's topic, but it's just to show you that you can do this kind of thing. And then we also have templates that are tied to very specific themes. For example, the evaluation of deliverables. You can find templates that allow you to have your work evaluated by one or even several teachers, for example. In this format, you can also find a template with peer assessment, or otherwise, you can set it up quite easily. I'm going to select the template called Submission and Evaluation of Work that you see here, and we'll be able to use it to set up this type of activity. So here we'll select Submission and Evaluation of Work. We'll click on Create. And now we can configure the challenge. So we'll start with a format where we want students to submit an assignment. And this assignment will be evaluated both by students and by teachers. So here we have the general information. Next, we move on to scheduling. So in this format, we have a submission phase, an evaluation phase, and a results phase. For us, what's happening is that we want this work to be evaluated by both students and teachers. So this evaluation phase, we'll call it evaluation of assignments by students. And we'll add a new evaluation phase. So we'll click on Add a Phase. We'll select Assignment Evaluation, and we'll call it Evaluation of Assignments by Teachers. So one or several teachers, it depends on the format you want to use. So now we have a new phase called Evaluation of Assignments by Teachers. So one phase dedicated to evaluation by students and another by teachers. I'll set the date, the deadline to November 12th as well, so that it's consistent with what we have. And then I'm going to set in the results phase that I want this results phase to be based on both, on the evaluations by students and by teachers. So soon we'll have a model that looks like this. Here I did it manually, but we'll have a model like this very soon. So there you go. That's our structure in the planning. Next, in the instructions, we can define guidelines, whether it's for the submission phase, the evaluation phase, or the results phase. These instructions are already predefined, but you can modify them if needed. As I mentioned, there's a built-in guide to explain how to give relevant feedback. And then in the participant section, we can register participants for our different phases. For the submission phase, it's the students who submit an assignment. So here I'm going to indicate that I want to enroll them individually in this assignment. So here I'll specify that I want it to be the groups, all the students from groups A, B, and C that I have in Moodle. And so now my 14 students have been enrolled in the submission phase. It also works with groups, so you can enroll students as a group when you register them as a team. So if you have groups on Moodle or another LMS, you can retrieve them. Otherwise, you can import them in Excel format, which works very well too, using this button. Next, we'll enroll the students in the evaluation phase. So here, I'm going to say that I want to reuse the participants from the submission phase. I click on reuse enrollments from the submission phase. And so now I have the students who were enrolled in the evaluation phase as well. And then I have the evaluation of the work by the teachers. So here I'm going to enroll not students, but teachers in this phase. I click on enroll individually, course manager. And now I'm going to enroll myself, so Jean, along with my colleague Florent, so that both of us can evaluate the 14 students. That's done. So we've enrolled the students and the teachers in our phases. Next, we have the evaluation criteria. So here we're going to define on what basis the students and teachers will be able to evaluate. So here for the students, let's say it's a CV evaluation. I have a set of criteria called CV evaluation in Challenge Me, and I'll be able to select it so that the students can evaluate their classmates' CVs using criteria that already exist. So here I have clarity of CV presentation, relevance of information, highlighting of skills, etc. With each time 4 performance options that allow students to evaluate more easily. And there's also a feedback field at the end, which I can leave active, deactivate, make mandatory if needed, etc. Each criterion is editable, so you can click to edit the criterion and modify the criteria, which are listed. And that really allows us to personalize these criteria if needed. So here I started from existing criteria, but I could just as easily start from scratch. So I click on new criteria and I choose the format that interests me. Here we had criteria in the form of predefined options, but I could just as well have criteria in the form of stars. If I want a criterion in the form of 1 to 10 stars, I enter my criterion. And now I have my new criterion that has been added with 1 to 10 stars. So that's for evaluation by the students. Now for evaluation by the teachers, we could very well decide to use the same criteria, or we might want the teachers to simply give a score. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to set the number out of 20 and I'm going to enter the grade. The name of the criterion will simply be called grade to show a bit the two approaches we can take. So here the teacher will just have to give a grade from 0 to 20 and provide feedback. In the options, I'm not going to show you everything, but just the main elements. You can define the expected file format if you only want PDFs or only videos. Since we can handle video, we accept up to 3 gigabytes per file per student. We can absolutely accept this type of format. We can choose to activate only Chantex. There are quite a few options at this level. Then for teachers, generally, we will lift anonymity. For students, anonymity is active, but for teachers, we will lift anonymity. Generally, teachers do not want anonymity when evaluating. For students, we actually recommend it to avoid bias. And then in terms of results, we can specify what we want to show to the students. So by default, we have the grade, the average per criterion, and the feedback received. So that's what the students will be able to see during the results phase. And then we can customize the grade. So here I'll say I want a grade out of 20 with a coefficient of 1 for the evaluation of work by the students. And then a coefficient of 2 for the evaluation by the teacher. So the teacher's grade will count twice as much as the one given by the students in the final grade. So that's a format we might use, or even a coefficient of 3 if we want to give more weight to the teacher. And as a result, the grade will be calculated automatically. and then we can set up the assignment of evaluators. So here for the students, let's say we want each student to evaluate 3 assignments, for example. And then for the teachers, let's say they evaluate 14 assignments so that they can evaluate all the assignments since there are 14 students enrolled. After that, that's it. For the 3, the system will automatically distribute the number of assignments to be evaluated by each student. Next, we can activate agents. AI. So that's what I was talking to you about. For example, for the students, we could very well activate an AI agent that will help them write feedback. Here, I'm using the AI agent called Help the Student Make Their Feedback More Useful and Relevant. Typically, these are AI agents that I can activate during certain phases if needed. I also have a summarizing AI agent to synthesize the submissions and feedback received for the students. It can also be interesting to activate it, and it's not mandatory. This is really just if you want to add agents, just know that it's possible. And then once that's done, you can click on publish. At that point, the challenge will be accessible to the students. They'll just have to click on the activity in Moodle to access it. And for teachers, it's the same. They just click on it, and then they'll have a little tab, participation to be able to assess. And then if you want to see what it looks like from the participant side, you can click on preview, and you'll have an interface that lets you see and preview the challenge as a user. So here, Paul Giraud is a student, and I'm viewing the challenge as of the 29th. On the 29th, I'll have my submission phase. I can submit my CV here. Then I only see the phase where students evaluate the work. Since I'm only enrolled in that phase, I'm not enrolled in the phase where teachers do the evaluation. So now, if I set the date to November 6th, the evaluation phase will be active. So I click on it. I have my 3 assignments to evaluate along with the CVs, which are displayed here. And then on the right, I'll have the different criteria that were defined for this evaluation phase. I also have the AI agent that can assist me in writing my feedback. And then afterwards, I have the results starting from November 12th. It's November, so now I'm going to set it to the 13th. And then when the results are available, I'll be able to see my grade and also the average per criterion for that phase. So for teachers, if I take Jean Fer, for example, oops, I made a mistake. There we go. For teachers, so here I'm viewing as Jean, they will only see in the end the phase where the teacher evaluates the work, since that's their section. The phase in which they are registered. So I click on it. And here I can see all the students since I specified that I wanted teachers to evaluate all the students with their names. So here it's not anonymous. Now for CV evaluation, it's less likely to be anonymous since by default, a CV will include the name. But in the case of another type of deliverable, anonymity is lifted, so we know who we're evaluating. And as a teacher, you can simply give a grade here. In what we've set up now, everything is configurable. This is just to show you the principle. So that's a bit how it works to preview the challenge and then to monitor the activity. So here you have 3 tabs. Configuration is for setting up your challenge and preview. This is to see what it looks like from the participant's side, and activity tracking is to see how participation is going. So here in the tracking tab, I have the submission phase with the list of students and then whether or not they have properly submitted an assignment. Next, I have the evaluation phase to see if each student has properly evaluated their peers. Same thing for the teachers. So if there are several teachers who have evaluated, it also allows you to track, if you are the course coordinator, the progress regarding the different evaluations. And then you have the summary phase, which allows you to synthesize all the grades. So one column for the evaluation of assignments by students and one by teachers with the final grade calculated. After that, you can modify all of this here in the grading settings. You can change the final grade to be out of 20, 100, 10, whatever you want. You can also review the weighting coefficients if needed. Everything is customizable, even when the challenge has already started. And then you can click on any item to edit the evaluations. For example, if you want to edit a student's evaluation, it's completely possible by clicking on it. And you can export all of this in Excel format to have all the data in an Excel file.